Hey everyone, this is Exploring Fiction, and welcome back to another video. In case you guys didn't know, I'm reading through A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin for the first time, and documenting my thoughts here on the channel. And if you've seen my video covering the first book, A Game of Thrones, you'll know that I fell in love with the series, its characters, and its world right away. So, now that I've read its sequel, A Clash of Kings, let's talk about it. And there will be spoilers ahead for Book 2, A Clash of Kings, in the series A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So if you haven't read it, be prepared for spoilers. And right off the bat, I was ecstatic to dive back into this world, because as you'll know if you've watched my previous video, that was my favorite part of the first book. The world is just as magical in this book, which I was concerned about since I've had a while to sit with it. But no, it's just as wondrous and enthralling as before. Again, as a writer, world builder, and creator myself, I can truly appreciate the names, descriptions, and details George R.R. Martin gives to the people, places, and things of his world. It gives the story and the world around it a great amount of unseen depth. And while with the previous book, I stated that I liked the political intrigue much more than the magic-based plot lines, with A Clash of Kings, I can say I enjoyed both equally. Jon Snow's story especially started to heat up, but I'll get to that soon enough. Some of my most favorite characters weren't even POV characters, which is kind of a common theme with the last book. You know, it was probably a mix between POV characters and non-POV characters that I enjoyed in A Game of Thrones. And in The Clash of Kings, my most favorite characters were some of the non-POV ones. I still like Robb Stark the best, even though he's barely in this book, because I feel as though he's one of the only true good characters now that Ned Stark, his father, is gone. Another favorite was Stannis Baratheon, because I wanted to root for him since he got swindled and neglected much wealth and fame that should have been his through all the treachery that his brothers and other people in the realm committed. You know, he's someone you really want to root for because of how much he was kind of things that should have been his by birthright were stolen from him. I also loved the complexity of Stannis' character. Many times it seemed like Stannis was one step away from achieving his goals, but personal vendettas and thoughts of revenge held him back in all the wrong ways. You know, that's how you know it's good writing, because I was rooting for Stannis at a lot of points, and there were times where he was one good decision away from getting exactly what he wanted and becoming victorious, and he was just held back by revenge, or foolhardiness, or stubbornness a little too much. Jon Snow was another favorite of mine, since he's still an underdog, but now he was given a more important role with more to do, which of course we'll talk about more later. But in the first book, Jon was more of training to be a part of the Night's Watch, and he didn't really do too much. But in this book, there's a lot that he does. He goes out adventuring beyond the wall, and he sees a lot more, he does a lot more, and so I liked him even more. And of course, I must mention Tyrion Lannister. He was much more in on the action and political intrigue this time, and I love seeing him plotting and trying to outwit his sister to gain control of King's Landing. I can't wait to see what happens to him now that he's no longer the Hand of the King. Finally, one minor character I liked was Jaqen H'ghar, and hopefully I'm saying that name right, but if you don't know who I'm talking about, it's the guy with the red and white hair, one of the prisoners Yoren recruited for the Night's Watch, one of the three who were so dangerous they were kept in chains, but later he was freed when they got to Harrenhal, and since Arya saved his life, he promised her 3 deaths in return, so he went out and killed 3 people that she requested. His mannerisms, as well as his mystical power, felt like a breath of fresh air amidst the more grumpy and realistic characters in the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. And again, there was an air of mystery about him that really hearkened me to him, even though he's supposedly this really dangerous and bad guy. You know, The way he interacted with Arya and was kind of her friend when no one else was not heartwarming, but kind of calming. And as for my least favorite characters, I still must pick Cersei Lannister and Joffrey Baratheon, because they're just as awful and unbearable as before. But there's also a newcomer to this category, Theon Greyjoy. Now, I liked Theon in the first book, but I could tell he was a bit of a brat and kind of a smug character. And now that he's a POV character, that is more than confirmed, and it was very predictable that when he was picked as Robb's liaison to his old home, the Iron Islands, he would betray his friend and foster brother. You know, I could kind of see that coming from a mile away, and I knew it was a terrible decision by Robb to send Theon back home. I think Robb should have picked someone else, anyone else, other than Theon Greyjoy, and kept Theon close, you know. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, because you don't really know where Theon's allegiance lies. But with every chapter of Theon's, he became more and more unlikable, to the point where in the end, when he himself is betrayed by Ramsay Bolton, I only felt bad because Winterfell was going to be ravaged either way. You know, once Sir Roderick Castle died, there was no one who was going to take care of Winterfell between Theon or Ramsay Bolton. But you know, it's not like I was rooting for the latter, but Theon was just kind of so smug and so unlikable that I didn't really care that much about him. I had no sympathy for Theon, but I think he was made to be a character we love to hate, and he was written beautifully in that way. And before we move into the last segment of this video, let me just say that I love the ending of this book, with Bran and Rickon splitting up and going on the run. It gives the feeling that now that Winterfell has fallen, there's not really anywhere safe in the Seven Kingdoms, which somehow gives this book's ending a more ominous feel than the previous one, if that's even possible. And now, just like I did with A Game of Thrones, I'm going to rank each of the POV characters by how much I enjoyed their chapters in this book. And coming in at number 10 is Master Cresson. And again, just like Will, the Night's Watch Ranger from book 1, he's just the prologue character. Although I did enjoy getting a glimpse into the world of Stannis Baratheon for the first time after such a long wait, as well as the magic that drives him and Melisandre, and Master Cresson's tale was kind of a tragic one, but a good way to start off the book. Number 9 in POV characters in A Clash of Kings is Davos Seaworth. And again, I did enjoy his chapters, especially because he's close to Stannis, a character who was only a name in the wind in the first book. But Davos only had 3 chapters, so while I enjoyed them, I just didn't sit with his character long enough to rank him any higher. At number 8, Theon Greyjoy, a sleazy character who I touched on before, who was written very well, but not fun to spend time with because of his personality. Also, he betrayed my favorite character of all, so I can't root for him too much. His chapters were pretty entertaining though, especially visiting the Iron Islands for the first time. Number 7, Catelyn Stark. And Catelyn came in at number 2 in my ranking for the first book, but I just didn't find her chapters as good this time around. Sure, she had some great moments, like witnessing the death of Renly Baratheon, or trying to bring Renly and Stannis to peace, but I found Catelyn more annoying and kind of mopey this time. At number 6 for POV characters in A Clash of Kings is Daenerys Targaryen. Her chapters were so much better this time around. Yeah, the first few were just her wandering again, but once she got to Karth, hopefully I'm saying that name of that city correctly, especially encountering the Warlocks, her part to play began to heat up a lot more for me, no pun intended. At number 5, Sansa Stark. If you recall, I thought in the last book Sansa was quite annoying, and I even ranked her among my least favorite characters in that book. And while she still is a bit, her chapters were a lot better this time around. Her relationship with the Hound and Cersei keep things interesting, and her newfound friendship with Ser Dantos leaves me hoping for her safety. At number 4, I've put Bran Stark. I've come to love Bran Stark, especially as the young Lord of Winterfell, but even after that too. The revelation that he is a warg and can see through his wolf Summer makes things really interesting for where his arc could go. He's a really endearing character, probably one of the most genuine and lovable out of all the POV characters. My third favorite POV character in A Clash of Kings was Arya Stark. her chapters seem the most like a fantasy quest story, as Arya seems to be doing the most broad traveling of all. From potential member of the Night's Watch, to slave, to fugitive, Arya's story was never dull. Even when she was sitting still, she had Jaqen H'ghar to spice things up, and she always feels like she's in some sort of danger, but the strength of her character to not break under that pressure is really, really cool to see. And at number 2, I have Jon Snow. In the first book, I thought Jon Snow's chapters had little plot or boring plot, but now that the Night's Watch has advanced north of the Wall, and he's no longer Lord Commander Mormont's squire, he's become much more fun to follow. I can't wait to see what happens next, especially now that he's developed into a Night's Watch ranger, and then was forced to kill Qhorin Halfhand, a man he admired, and now must go undercover into the wildling ranks. You know, that idea of someone going undercover, being a double agent, really is an inspiring one, and one that's always fun to read, and always fun to witness, no matter what type of entertainment. So, I'm really hoping Jon Snow's story progresses well in the next book. But of course, my number 1 favorite POV character in A Clash of Kings is Tyrion Lannister. Now I really understand why everyone loves Tyrion. His wit, humor, and cunning combined together to make a great character to follow. And like I said before, I loved watching him try to outwit those around him, whether it be Cersei or Littlefinger. Ultimately, Tyrion was the most compelling and interesting character in A Clash of Kings, even if not the most morally good. And one little last note I have before I wrap this video up is that I really am enjoying what George R.R. Martin is doing with A Song of Ice and Fire, these books. You know, it feels like the climax of the story comes a little bit earlier than a lot of other fantasy novels. Like in the first book, when Ned is killed, there's still a good bit of plot that happens after that. And in this story, the climax is definitely the battle at King's Landing between Stannis and Joffrey and their forces. But yet there's still a lot more happening after that. So that's something I personally haven't encountered much in fantasy stories, but I'm really enjoying how Martin is putting the climax earlier in the book and letting you sit with it and its consequences a little bit before he wraps it all up. So, I would say I loved A Clash of Kings, the second book in A Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe not as much as the first book, but very close. The world and the characters in it are so rich and alive, I can't help but be excited with every turn of the page. So guys, those are my thoughts after reading A Clash of Kings for the first time. Let me know what you thought about this book down below if you've read it, and if you have anything to say about this book or this series, please let me know. I would love to talk about it. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you're new here, I would love to have you, and like always, I will see you next time.